Hey everybody, and welcome to the first RISE webinar of 2022. All right, it looks like folks have made it into the Zoom room. I'm sure we'll see more trickle in throughout the day, but thanks for joining. I'm really excited. First of all, my name is Michael Wu. I'm the Executive Director of the Resilient Infrastructure and Secure Energy Consortium. We are the first private sector coalition of organizations now. More than 370 organizations who are RISE members, which is a pretty incredible number given that this is launched less than a year ago. And I think that's indicative of the amount of energy and excitement. And really that's centered around why we're here today to talk and why we believe 2022 is the key year, is the critical year, and is an inflection point for our clean and resilient energy future. Some notes that I want to make at the front end of this. First of all, we are recording this. So this will be posted on the RISE website at rise-consortium.org. In addition, we will be sending all of the attendees slides that are presented today. We will, this as for those of you who have been to RISE events before, we will have a moderated conversation, set of high-paced conversations with really brilliant experts that I'm excited to introduce you to in a moment. But we will have the opportunity to do Q&A, and please drop your questions into the question and answer feature of Zoom and not the chat. If you're having technical challenges with the webinar, we would like to reserve those questions for the chat. But if you have substantive questions for our guests, then we'd ask you to put those into the Q&A feature. And then finally, we issued a newsletter, the RISE newsletter, yesterday that featured a lot of really exciting opportunities for RISE members to contribute. And if you are not receiving that newsletter, either because you're not yet a RISE member, or you're ineligible to be a RISE member because you currently work in government, you can email Haley, our program manager at rise@ati.org. All right, let's jump into what we're talking about today. So we'll be doing some introductions, but then I'm excited to introduce Steve Capana, who's the Director of Technology Policy at the Department of Energy. We're going to talk bipartisan infrastructure law, which is, as you probably know, the largest single investment in infrastructure in this nation's history. So a lot of exciting things to unpack there. And then we'll be turning to Tate McDonald, partner at Holland & Knight, who is deeply experienced and familiar with energy innovation and contracting and financing policy, and is going to be somebody who is going to deliver a lot of insights to everybody about bipartisan infrastructure law, but also just more broadly, what does it mean in the context of 2022 climate and energy action? Also, I just wanted to highlight some pretty exciting things that are coming out of the federal government, and things that I would very much encourage RISE members to look at and think about. First of all, in December of 2021, President Biden signed an executive order. I can't emphasize this enough. This is the strongest action ever taken by a government for the federal government to take on climate and to totally transform the nature of government acquisition and government energy use, and focus on clean energy. So there are a number of things that are totally transformational efforts that the government has set out for itself as goals and mandates to achieve, including 100% zero emission vehicle acquisition by 2035, 100% carbon-free energy, 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2040. These are incredible investments in clean energy, and I would very much recommend folks that look through the executive order. It's pretty short, but it has incredibly ambitious goals for the government to achieve. Related to that, we're seeing action from the agencies that is similarly ambitious. And is in particular looking for private sector engagement for how they're going to achieve any of these things. So DoD, in partnership with the General Services Administration, released a request for information to understand, like, how can they meet their requirements for 24/7 carbon pollution-free electricity for the federal government in the time frame that they have. They're looking for innovations. They're looking for private sector ideas that will help them achieve some of these ambitious goals and actions. The US Army just released its climate strategy last week. That strategy includes the strongest actions by any military service to confront climate change, including, and also to strengthen the resilience and capabilities of its installations, weapon systems, and platforms. It includes actions like ensuring there's a microgrid on every Army installation. It includes fielding an all-electric tactical vehicle fleet in the coming decades. It includes serious actions and investments in our future, in our Army's future, particularly focused around capabilities, new capabilities for our warfighters. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that as well. It also gives an idea of why are we doing this. It is centered particularly around strengthening our Army's capabilities and our Army's in our service of our Army's missions to fight and win our nation's wars. And finally, RISE is going to be very active over the coming months. So we will be next week at the Blue Innovation Symposium in Newport, Rhode Island. We will be, I'll be appearing along with the ATI CEO and President Chris Van Meter in a conversation. If you're coming to that event, which is an event focused on maritime technology development, we would love to see you. Please let me know, drop us a line. Let me know if you'd like to be there and like to meet. We will be hosting an event next month on the electrifying the tactical edge. So what I just described about the Army strategy around fielding an all-electric vehicle tactical fleet, we'll be talking to the folks who are actually looking at those technologies and thinking about how to integrate those technologies next month. We'll be at the Smart Cities Startup Challenge in Columbus, Ohio in April. We'll be hosting a webinar on DoD climate strategy, so hosting the services who are developing and articulating and announcing their own climate strategies. We expect the Navy's climate strategy to come out very shortly. We'll have DoD reps there as well. So what is the future of DoD climate strategy? And finally, we will be sending a save the date soon, but we'll be hosting an in-person event at Defense Tech Connect, and similar to last year, that we hope everybody will attend. So if you're new to RISE and you aren't yet a member, it is free to join. You can join at rise-consortium.org, and we'd love to welcome you. It's about a one-page membership agreement. It's very simple. And like I said, you can join this coalition now of more than 370 organizations that are dedicated to climate and clean energy action for DoD and the rest of the federal government. So now I want to turn to a friend and colleague who is also an expert on a lot of the issues that we're talking about here, particularly around clean energy. And why I asked Steve Capana, who again is the Director of Technology Policy at Department of Energy, to join us is because he's really, DOE is doing some fascinating and really exciting things around the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I think it's a lot of the questions that we have about our clean and resilient energy future are tied to the actions and transformation that's taking place at the Department of Energy here. So Steve is the perfect person to talk to. One, because as the Director of Technology Policy, he's at this intersection of different technologies and different and a changing mission within the department that we're excited to hear his insights from a leadership position. But also two, he's seen it evolve. So Steve has been with the Department of Energy, I think since 2009. Is that right, Steve? 2000 or 2010? Like
2011.
2011. Sorry. Yeah. So he has seen it evolve inside and outside. His previous position prior to rejoining the Department of Energy was as the Director of Climate Policy and Analysis at the Environmental Defense Fund. But he has a long history of leadership at the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. He's also a mean, energetic, and extremely enthusiastic pickup basketball player. Can't recommend his screens or offensive rebounding highly enough. Steve, welcome to this RISE webinar. I'm excited to hear really specifically about, like, we keep talking about this bipartisan infrastructure law and its massive scope, and it's hard to understand like what that means mechanically and what that means from sort of an individual opportunity perspective. So can you just break it down for our audience about what what the big picture opportunities related to this investment in our infrastructure is going to mean for clean energy, and how is the department responding to it?
Yeah, sure. Be happy to. So first of all, thanks very much for having me. Also, I'll note for anyone who doesn't play pickup basketball that whenever someone compliments your screens and offensive rebounding, it means that you are not a very good shooter, which is fair enough in this case. And we're really excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation. Just a little bit of further context for my role in my office as well. So I'm Director of Technology Policy in the Office of Policy. We're the Secretary's policy advisors. So we really do have purview over all the department's activities and serve as sort of lead advisor for all domestic energy-related activities. And so that means that we are really integrally involved in thinking about executing and planning and developing provisions that are passed in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And as Mike said, this is the largest long-term investment in our infrastructure in nearly a century, which that's infrastructure overall, and it's also specifically true for energy infrastructure, but also infrastructure across the economy. Tate might talk a little bit more about that, but largest federal investment ever in public transit and passenger rail, in clean drinking water and wastewater, things like that. They're really just essential to everybody's everyday lives. It's also the biggest change to the department since we were founded in 1977. The $62 billion that the DOE received as part of the bipartisan law, which, by the way, I'll refer to as bill, even though it's not a bill, it's a law, bipartisan infrastructure law. So sorry if that's confusing. DOE is going to stand up 60 new programs, including 16 demonstration and 32 deployment programs. It also expands funding for another dozen existing RD&D programs. And these investments are going to help us strengthen our supply chains, lower energy prices, and in the long run, ease inflationary pressures as well. And it also helps us tackle the climate crisis by making the largest investment in transmission in the infrastructure in history, and also by electrifying thousands of school and transit buses across the country. I'll get into a little bit more detail on some of the specific provisions. I just want to note that Secretary Granholm, in thinking about how to implement these priorities for these provisions, has laid out 5 key priorities that underpin all of our activities here. And those are creating jobs, supporting equity and environmental justice, reducing emissions to meet our quite ambitious climate goals, shoring up domestic manufacturing, and ensuring that there's private sector uptake on the other end too. We don't want these investments to be happening in the vacuum. We want the private sector to step in and take the mantle after these provisions are done. So Mike, if you want to pull up a couple of the slides I have, I can just run through some of those key provisions. So first of all, investing in American manufacturing and workers. As I said, this is really going to revitalize our supply chains and America's manufacturing leadership. Specifically, there's a ton of money in the supply chain, in developing the supply chain for batteries, as well as additional more than $1 billion for clean hydrogen manufacturing and advancing recycling RD&D. There's specific investments targeted at not just in this provision here, but throughout the bill, targeting investments in energy communities, so communities that have had fossil be a big part of their economy, and which are then going to have to work through this transition to make sure that they get a just transition. And so that's really exciting, as well as the focus on investments in underserved communities elsewhere. And then it invests in America's workforce. Right? We think that, combined with if the Build Back Better provision were to pass as well, then combine, this the combination would really create something like 1.5 million jobs per year, which is incredible over the next decade. And invest hundreds of millions of dollars in workforce development, and also establishes this Energy Jobs Council to think about how we're creating good quality union jobs and make sure that the investments that we're making help build up U.S. manufacturing, U.S. economy. Right. It also expands our access to energy efficiency and clean energy. This is really crucial for our equity and Justice 40 goals, Justice 40 being the administration's priority to make sure that we have 40% of both the investments and the benefits going to environmental justice communities. And so these are some of the provisions that can, oh, sorry, I'm hearing that the sound isn't good. Sorry, is that any better? If not, I can try to drop the micro headphones, see if that helps.
Yeah, Steve, I think you're a little garbled. I don't know if holding the microphone closer is the answer. We're trying to do it boost on our end as well.
Apologies for that.
That sounds good. Yeah.
That sounds good. Okay.
Yeah.
There. Sorry about that, everybody. So these investments, I think, are also crucial to make sure that we ease the burden on low-income households and households that have higher energy burdens of the economy. So you can go to the next slide, I think. It's also essential to deliver the reliable, clean, affordable power that we're going to need to get to 100% clean electricity by 2035 and zero emissions by 2050. We're looking at more than $17 billion of investment into the electrical grid. That includes investments specifically for resilience against disruptive events, which include climate-related events and cyber attacks. It also includes a number of investments in transmission and an expansion of the Smart Grid Investment Grant Program to focus really on flexibility investments. So thinking about upgrading existing transmission distribution systems, also deploying energy storage, and ensuring that we can not only have a power system that is reliable, but one that can better accommodate the large amounts of variable renewable energy that we need to achieve our targets. And it also importantly makes investments in our existing clean generation fleet with nuclear. And finally, I believe, there's a ton on clean energy demonstrations. And this is really important to help make sure that the department is focused not just on the early stage R&D, but on the whole innovation chain. And to make sure that, so to accomplish this goal, we're starting a new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, which is going to have nearly $22 billion in funding, including some really crucial technologies for the future clean energy economy, clean hydrogen, carbon capture, direct air capture, industrial emissions, and again, specific investments focused on rural areas and areas that have been hard hit economically as well. So I think I'll stop there, Mike, and see if you have any questions.
Awesome. Yeah. So first of all, thanks, Steve, for actually, I'm going to share your last slide real quick because I do think it's valuable. So obviously, you can stay updated as funding opportunities are being announced, as RFIs are being announced. I saw that there was an RFI just yesterday, I think, for the hydrogen hubs that was issued by various offices in EERE. So just any other advice before we turn to our conversation on how to stay up to date as things are happening?
Yeah, sorry, thanks for bringing this back up. Sorry for forgetting about this slide, which is probably the most important slide I have. So first of all, this website here for DOE is where we're going to have all of the information as far as anything public going out. As Mike mentioned, we've had sort of a steady stream of requests for information happening already, and that's going to continue over the weeks and months to come. Not every provision, but the majority of provisions, I would say, are going to have some sort of request for information. And I just want to underline, this really is important for us to hear from you all and from people who are interested in applying about how these programs should be designed, what tools we need to be using to make sure that these investments are as effective as possible, and how to make sure it works not just for sort of companies and corporations that are used to working with the government, but also smaller companies and innovators who are just getting started. We really want to make sure that we hear from everybody. And I promise you that we really do need the RFIs. And I'll also flag that I'm happy to serve as a touch point into the department as well. So if you make submissions to the RFIs and feel like it's going into a black box, you're also more than welcome to send them to me directly. I'll make sure to go to the right person. Yeah.
Wow, be careful what you wish for, Steve. We'll be happy to send your contact information far and wide. So Steve, I think like where I'd want to start is just what you said, which is highlighting that this is a huge change and shift in focus from DOE. And as you articulate, and as we mentioned, you've seen that evolution in focus throughout your career at DOE. But describe that for our audience. What does it mean when we say we're shifting? The agency is really shifting its focus. How does that work? How does that operate, sort of individually and mechanically?
Yeah, it's really exciting. And by the way, does this improve my audio?
Yeah, that was a lot better. Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So it's really exciting. DOE is transforming in response to this bill. We announced a reorganization last week that creates a new Undersecretary for Infrastructure to complement our existing Undersecretary, which was Undersecretary of Energy, I believe, and now is
Science and Energy. Yeah.
Science and Energy, and now is Science and Innovation, or Energy Innovation. I think that creating this new apparatus really highlights that the secretary has from day one, she's been really excited on making sure that we see our mission as going beyond just R&D and to really making sure that we get these technologies out into the marketplace and that it can't just stop at the lab. We need to make sure that we get these technologies out there. So the new undersecretary, just as I said, the organization was just announced last week. There's still a lot of question marks about what it's going to look like in practice. But I will say that the new undersecretary is going to be the one who's responsible for implementation of the bipartisan law. The acting undersecretary right now is Dr. Kathleen Hogan, who has a long career in government, first at EPA and then at DOE, and who had been serving as acting undersecretary for Science and Energy earlier in the administration as well. So and has already been leading our transition, our implementation of the bipartisan law. So she's really well positioned to lead this new effort. And it'll focus on things like, it'll include rather things like the Loan Programs Office, this new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, or CSER, as well as new offices that are going to focus on grid infrastructure, state and community energy programs, and manufacturing and energy supply chains. And I'll just also mention that besides this reorganization, which is the most visible manifestation of how DOE is changing, ever since the bill passed, we've really been working in a collaborative and cross-cutting way, in a deeper way than I think I've seen before at DOE. We have something like 9 cross-departmental working groups on specific topic areas like grid infrastructure, some R&D provisions, the demonstration hubs, as well as business operations working groups, and they feature leadership from across the department. The highest levels of DOE are getting involved in basically reviewing every RFI and making sure that the program design across the board is consistent with our goals and ambitions. You know, we don't get $62 billion every day, and so we really want to make sure that we spend it well and effectively.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, Steve, I think one of the things that you mentioned in the conversation is that you're looking for small businesses to interact, and a huge percentage of our members are small business innovators, and they frankly don't have very good things to say about interacting with the government as a whole, and in particular, getting those investments to and the kind of capital needed to scale up. And I know ARPA-E was, an attempt to sort of begin that scaling effort, and provide some access to small businesses. But does this shift to demonstration focus? How does that embrace small business, or how is that? How are we starting to think about? I'm sure it's a little bit premature to describe that fully since you're just issuing requests for information. But how should small businesses be thinking about capitalizing on the bipartisan infrastructure law to get the kind of investment that they need to scale their technologies?
Well, I'll answer that in two ways. One is, as I said before, engaging and responding to when we put out questions. This is the opportunity to help us shape the programs. This is the opportunity to help tell us what we need to be doing to make it work for you. So really want to encourage you all to take that opportunity seriously. I'll also say that not only are we organized around topic areas internally, but we're really organized on external engagement as well to make sure that we're trying to create portals that'll make it easier for applicants to get tech assistance. We also want to have portals for state and local governments who want to partner with us. And there are some discrete opportunities as well for specific provisions. For instance, we have a hydrogen matchmaker tool, which is going to be used to help connect hydrogen potential suppliers, technology providers, and also potential users in the development of these hydrogen hubs. And I think we're envisioning similar things for other provisions as well. And if there are opportunities that you see for that kind of sort of matchmaking service that we can provide, we'd be really interested in hearing that. And I'll just say again that this is true because we not only want to target the small businesses, but we really want to have a focus on making sure that we're reaching communities across the country and not just sort of the everyday usual suspects of people who attract funding.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, is to see those kinds of funds really not just stimulating new technologies and deploying new technologies where we've always deployed new technologies before, but creating clean energy communities in places that have traditionally been underinvested. And I was really heartened to see, I mean, particularly in the hydrogen hub RFI that just came out, that huge focus of equity and justice and specific resources tied to disadvantaged communities. I'm curious about the balance between programs that DOE is planning to sort of do itself, programs that it's planning to work with like DOE national laboratory partners, some of whom are RISE members, and then working with state energy offices and things like that, or state and local partners for investment. Like, from a big picture perspective, from your seat, how should that sort of be deployed, and what is the sort of process for identifying, like, this is something that DOE can do internally, this is something that we really need our national laboratory partners, and this is something that's actually really better left to the states?
Well, in some cases, we're required to go through the states, or it makes sense to go through the states anyway. And we really want to empower state and local governments to make the investments that are best for their communities and that are most appropriate for their communities. We want to make sure we're doing a lot of community engagement along those lines as well. The national labs are going to be partners on, are partners in a lot of what we do anyway, and so that's not going to change for the bipartisan law implementation. as far as what we can do ourselves, I mean, I'll flag that, I don't want to just sort of declare mission accomplished because the bill passed, right? The secretary has said we need to hire 1,000 new federal employees.
Right.
Um, you mentioned that it's not always easy to work with the federal government in funding. It's also not always easy to work with the federal government hiring processes. This is not going to be an easy thing to do to scale up to the level we need to as quickly as we need to. That's going to take additional time and resources, and that means that we're going to be, especially as we try to get these programs moving as quickly as we can, we're going to be thinking of where we can partner with external people, external organizations, the national labs, to make sure that we're managing the money really effectively, being really successful, but also not getting out the door as quickly as we can while still being good stewards of the money and accomplishing the goals.
Yeah, I don't envy that challenge. I mean, having participated in federal government hiring in the past and trying to figure that out. But and this is really the definition of building the airplane as you're flying it, right? You are trying to add the capacity to manage the funds in and deploy them in a reasonable way while you are also needing to stand up the programs to deploy the funds. And I think that's a real challenge. I do want to turn to some of the questions that we've received. The first question is just is pretty simple. Is DOE supporting water projects, or is that other agencies that are focusing on water technology? And you mentioned clean drinking water efforts.
Yeah, the clean drinking water is largely EPA. There's a big program for lead pipe removal as well, or replacement rather, I should say, as well. That's also EPA. On the water side, DOE is investing in hydropower upgrades for both environmental and efficiency upgrades, and just sort of needed repairs. Some of these facilities are decades old. Some cases like many decades old. And so really need investments to keep it remaining sort of the backbone of our renewable power system. So that's where most of the water. I will say that also there's a lot of work thinking about the energy water nexus as well. But that's not necessarily specific to these investments. That's just sort of something that we have in our mind at all times anyway.
Absolutely. We have another question very near and dear to my heart from Travis Richards. Travis asks really about the nature of these programs and whether they relate to infrastructure interdependencies. He highlights, as a Texan, his experience with the winter storms last February, and whether, for instance, some of these investment programs are also can be built to strengthen other infrastructure sectors. He cites natural gas, but other infrastructure sectors that are tied to uninterrupted access to electricity to continue to operate. And I guess a broader question that I have is, how are you thinking about, how is the department thinking about infrastructure interdependencies when you're making these incredibly large investments in specifically transforming the electric grid?
Yeah, I mean, we want to be developing these programs and implementing them to be responsive and to be built for the energy system that we hope and expect to have in 2035 and in 2050. And that means there's going to be a lot more electrification, there's going to be a lot more wind, there's going to be a lot more solar storage, and you need a much more flexible grid. All of those things mean that we need to be thinking about not just what infrastructure needs are there today, but how we can build it strategically to, put transmission lines, for instance, in a place where they can connect Midwestern wind to the population centers on the coasts. And how do you make sure that you're helping balance the grid when you have 25-30% solar electricity from generation? And all of these questions are going to be important, and resilience is an essential part of that. We want to make sure that these are operational systems that can be responsive to the sunniest day in the spring, and also the cold snaps, polar vortexes and climate extremes that we know are also going to be a bigger feature of the climate moving forward.
Absolutely. So, maybe this is in the weeds, but specifically, you mentioned an Office of Grid Infrastructure or a Grid Infrastructure Office that's coming to fruition as a part of this restructuring. How is that going to work with the Office of Electricity, which has traditionally been focused on, reimagining the transmission system and making those kinds of investments? What will that sort of interaction be now that they'll be under different undersecretaries?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's going to be, it's a good question for the Office of Electricity and Grid Transmission, but it honestly applies for a number of different technologies and sectors. There we are envisioning doing some joint strategy teams that cross I'm going to use internal lingo, S3, S4,
Yeah.
the two undersecretaries.
Got it.
And include leadership of both. So, I mean, I think like the specific breakdown of responsibilities is still to some extent TBD because it's still under development. But the Office of Electricity will remain as an essential part of maintaining resilience and grid operations, as well as this new Office of Grid Infrastructure, which is going to be focused a lot on building out the existing transmission, providing technical support to state, local governments, RTOs, ISOs across the country. And so, I don't know exactly what those tech strategy teams are going to be yet, how many they're going to be, but it's an active conversation within the department leadership.
That's great. I mean, if there's one thing that I think I would emphasize to the department, it's that you have to have, like, this new structure requires cross-functional teams, requires cross-functional collaboration, and requires collaboration with the private sector, and particularly smaller innovators, as you've already mentioned a couple times. But the sort of, I think the shift in agency focus means that the department can't sort of do what it's always done before. And I think that goes, across the federal government, given the scale and required speed of some of these ambitious goals that are articulated in the executive order or articulated within the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I've got a couple more questions, but we'll have to wrap this up pretty soon. Friend of Rise and noted former OMB official Cindy Valina asks a question: how will DOE play a leadership role in demonstrating clean energy investment and capabilities in its own facilities and across government? So I think the question is really, as you're shifting to this focus on demonstration, how is that going to be from a done on DOE facilities and the labs, and then how will it be done in places like perhaps DoD installations?
Well, as Cindy may remember, we first crossed paths when I was at the Alliance to Save Energy, working on a report on procurement of energy efficiency products and compliance across the federal government for the Federal Energy Management Program. So this is a question that I have deep ties to. I think that you mentioned, Mike, the executive order that came out and all the activities that are already happening around implementing that executive order, which, as you rightly said, is the most ambitious, aggressive, clear stance that we need to walk the walk and lead by example here. DOE does play a really important role through its Federal Energy Management Program in providing technical assistance to other agencies who are looking to green their facilities and comply with these requirements. That can be through helping them with performance contracting, helping them understand the various targets and provisions. It's easy to forget that none of these facilities managers whose job is going to be to green their facilities, often their first concern is, if their air conditioner goes out, they want to replace the air conditioner, not necessarily think about energy efficiency first. And so we need to make sure that they have right at their resources, right at their fingertips, the tools that they're going to need. So I don't know specifically. I know that FEMP is working very closely with CEQ and with the White House on implementation and in developing guidance around these tools. And I expect that DOE will continue to play a leadership role in that regard.
That's great. Yeah, I want to end. You noted this a little bit earlier, but this is again an incredibly large investment in electric vehicles, and in particular electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We're creating all of the dynamics that are present here are about tackling climate change, are increasing the emphasis on the electric grid itself. And so pairing that with electric grid investments and hardening and new technologies and storage, all that's going to be absolutely crucial. But how do those things evolve together? How do we link the increase in electric vehicle charging infrastructure that is going to create really large new loads and requirements, and explicitly tie the electric and transportation infrastructure sectors even more tied than they are already, with those investments in transmission and electric grid resilience, so that tying those interdependent systems together don't result in a greater risk of sort of cascading failure?
Yeah, that's a great question, and probably one I don't have time to answer fully.
Yeah, how are you going to fix the electric grid so that it's perfect in the future? Is really what I'm asking.
In
Yeah.
30 seconds, sure.
Yeah.
I will say, first of all, that I don't think I mentioned the new DOE Department of Transportation Joint Office around electric vehicle infrastructure development,
Perfect.
which is
Yeah.
huge, and is designed to make sure that the EV charging infrastructure that we need is not just going to be on highways or in cities, but in rural areas and underserved communities as well, so that you can have electric vehicle access across the country. So that'll be really important. But as you say, that also raises the need for increased investment in grid infrastructure across the country as well. There's no pat answer to how we do that together, except that we have these conversations that we're having internally, and from that we hear from you all to say, hey, by the way, this is a real risk. You better make sure you're paying attention to this. But we're thinking, for instance, about analysis around what it would look like to actually achieve our 100% by 2035 target, what electrification of transportation needs to look like to achieve our net zero targets, and how that all fits in together, where are those investments. So you do have direct leadership from transportation side, electric vehicle side, weighing in on the needs for the electric grid with the people who are running the transmission provisions, and vice versa, so that there's really a connective tissue being built to make sure that we're taking a systems approach and not just a technology. What's the next sort of widget I can invest in to make my technology 5% more efficient?
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's I think a really helpful articulation, and especially encouraging to hear about cross-agency collaboration with the Department of Transportation. Steve, thank you so much for your time. I have one last question for you before we turn to Tate, and it's what is one thing, like you outlined an incredible amount that the department's doing. Also, while, like we said, you're trying to hire 1,000 people. So what's one thing that makes you optimistic that this is all achievable?
Honestly, this is corny, but like the quality and of people that are working right now in to implement this across the department. And I don't mean political leadership. I mean, but sure, political leadership, but also civilian feds who are really taking this really seriously and working a lot of hours right now to try to get this right. And there's a lot of energy within the building to get this right. And the fact that we are being really thoughtful and proactive in anticipating the challenges that we're going to face. I'm sure we're not going to get everything right, but we're really working on it. And it's I think we've learned a lot from some of the lessons from the Recovery Act, where we similarly had to spend got a lot of money to spend quickly, and also just the really clear articulation of what our goals are and what we're working towards. And we're all rowing in the same direction. So that makes a big difference. Before we drop, I do just very quickly want to reiterate that website, in case people couldn't hear that before, is a really important place to go for all the information to stay up to date. And thank you again for the conversation and for bearing with me during my audio difficulties earlier in the talk.
Steve, thanks so much again for your time. We're going to drop that web URL in the chat so that all the attendees can have it. And again, your slides are going to go out. We will talk to you later about what exactly you meant by your offer to review individual RFI responses. So, and we'll make sure that there is a reasonable amount of connectivity to you in the future. But first of all, just from all of the participants on the webinar and the RISE members, thanks so much for your time. We're really excited to have you.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Now I'm also excited to turn to a friend and colleague, Tate McDonald. Tate is a partner at Holland and Knight. Tate has worked for more than a decade on energy innovation, on finance innovation, on clean energy development and deployment within programs. She's the person that I turn to when I have questions about, how are people going to implement certain provisions or ideas, or what does the future look like? So it's perfect that she's here for this conversation on what's next. So Tate, you just heard Steve's comments and perspective from Department of Energy, and also, a fair amount of what plans and collaborations they're doing within the department, but also with, in the interagency. I'm just curious to take a step back for a second and talk about the scale of the bipartisan infrastructure law across the government and what you think it'll mean for the future of infrastructure in this country. You're on mute, Tate.
I just realized I turned on my camera too soon and my mute not soon enough. But anyway, here we are. We're all here. So thanks for having me today. Looking forward to this discussion. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Tate McDonald and partner at Holland and Knight. Like Mike said, I've spent the past 15 years of my career at the intersection of government and technology, clean tech, commercialization specifically. So it's been a wild ride to say the least, but now what's good about where we are now is that we are finally at the point where there's going to be true impact for the sector with the government at the helm. So obviously people like me could not be more excited. What I will say in answering your specific question and why I gave that background and going into it is we actually did, so from one of the reasons why I came to Holland and Knight a few years back is because of our lobbying platform. So we actually did a lot of the lobbying on the front end programs as well, like specifically batteries, loan program improvements and expansion. So we've been involved before text was written over the last 2 years, essentially, which has been really exciting. Obviously, we saw the opportunity coming. And so now it's so exciting that people understand the language we've been speaking, because we were talking about it so long before people understood. So now, of course, we have, as Steve said, $73 billion in the energy programs as a whole, and $62 billion of that going into this new infrastructure office. So the bottom line is that in those discussions to set this up, and what's important probably from the industry perspective, is that there's a lot behind those programs that has not been announced and won't be announced. So not only do you have the legislative intent, then of course, as Steve started to talk about what they've been doing, what DOE has been doing, and what's important to know about DOE and where some of our insights will come from, some of my insights and my team's insights will come from, is there aren't that many people who specialize in this in DC. So we're a really small group. And so we've been working closely with DOE from the beginning because there are only so many people who know this. So right. So some of this today will just be insights on our opinions, but also what we've seen throughout this writing to deployment. And what's important though, is that and what I want to start with today is the importance of not only doing the RFIs, but reading what comes out of each of the like the notice of intent from the grid program, the notice of intent from batteries that came out. There is a ton of good information in those that actually goes to the intent of the program. So we understand not everybody's going to read the legislation, but it's just something that I want to kick off on the beginning because it's going to be important for companies that want to weigh in. And the other thing I will say, and this is what we tell our clients, like get comfortable and get ready for a wild ride, because this isn't happening right away. This isn't 1 or 2 years. This is 5 to 10 year money.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really helpful, Tate. And I think, as we talk about, like one thing that I think is important for our audience to understand is requests for information just aren't like questions that they're trying to hear from. They're the first opportunity for the government to articulate something about its program. And we see that time and time again, where, understanding and reading between the lines of those RFIs is incredibly important, because there are definitely, they are, as Steve said, they are genuinely curious, but also this is only after a lot of internal deliberation and thought of how these programs are going to be structured and conveyed. And it's a first opportunity to have a communication and collaboration with industry. So your point about, like, if you have skin in that game, or if you're interested in those issues, really examining carefully. So what would you be looking for as you're thinking from your client's perspective, or what are you highlighting in the information that's coming out that you think is going to be really important?
Yeah, great question. So I think what's important to start with is, remember, when you move S3, the infrastructure group, and then you move that out of the applied programs, which are the traditional DOE programs that have been around since the 70s, that we're all accustomed. Anybody who's hearing about the government will hear, like, the Vehicle Technologies Office, the hydrogen technologies. So what Steve is talking about is this whole new group of programs that will have cross collaboration. But what's important to know,
Hey, I'm gonna pull that up, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, actually. So what's important to note is that the new programs are all new money just for demonstrations. So just because like the hydrogen FOA will have some planning grants, likely have some planning associated with it, and huge hubs, that does not, so then you still have, especially for small business, this is important, you still have all the old hydrogen money, which is about 300 million a year, going through EERE. So when you look at the big announcements that come out, a lot of people are following the big dollars. Remember, there's lots and lots of dollars under there that is not moved around. It still exists, right? So, and the Energy Act of 2020, and the first year the Energy Act is hitting is right now in 2020, in FY 2022, created new programs under that as well. So just, especially for smaller businesses, what we tell smaller businesses is the hydrogen hubs and these big announcements are going to go to companies that are ready to deploy, like $100 million plus, but don't get frustrated by that, because there's all this other opportunity across the historical programs in the department.
That's really helpful. So just to highlight for our audience that doesn't love nerding out over org charts as much as Tate and I do, what Tate's referring to is this entirely new office of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure, the S3, and all of these offices. This is both taking existing offices that were under the previous Undersecretary for Science and Energy, and as well as creating new offices, including, as we mentioned, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. So this is an entirely new infrastructure structure for infrastructure that's specifically dedicated to the bipartisan infrastructure law and its deployment for DOE. And then the Office of the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation has the traditional offices that Tate was mentioning, including energy efficiency and renewable energy, fossil energy and carbon management, the Office of Electricity, as we mentioned. So that's the quick and dirty reorganization of Department of Energy. So Tate, I guess there are two opportunities that I'm thinking about when thinking about RISE members. One is looking at, like you said, those large scale hubs are going to need technology. Like the people who end up executing those companies are going to need technology providers they may not have. So there could be the possibility of partnering. And one of the unique things about RISE is that we have both those small business innovators and also the large scale utilities and other and larger, you know, A&E firms and the kinds of companies that are going to take. So question I think is, how do you envision DOE creating those kinds of collaborations, or are they going to outsource that to whether it's the laboratories or the sort of hub management companies themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm like, where do I even begin on this?
I know, yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
I could talk about this all day. So I think what's important to know, like, there is the hydrogen matching tool.
Yep.
I love, obviously, I have a lot of friends at DOE, and when you were in the government, some things, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, because I know some things can sometimes, you and I have been through this before. But the hub matching tool is just one step. A lot of it's going to be done by industry, because it's really going to be hard for DOE to do it. So DOE is trying, and like all of our clients are putting into the hub matching tool, right? But the bottom line is industry can't rely on DOE to do it alone. So what I would recommend, especially for small companies just entering the federal, like working with the federal government, and if you think about it this way, I think I can say this in a proven way now, because my career very much started with smaller companies working with feds for the first time, and now we work with a lot of the companies that have been working with the Fed, but just need to revitalize their strategy, right, and make it more effective. And so some of those are bigger, but when we worked with smaller companies, you kind of want to look for, I hate the term, but low-hanging fruit. And the hubs probably aren't the best low-hanging fruit. So you want to follow what's in your region, and you want to talk to the people in your region, but like you need to make sure it's a fit before you spend too much time on it. Like it's for the innovative technology, right? Because really this is back to like shovel ready to put $1 billion in the ground, which only a few, like hydrogen's just such a great example, because really only a few hubs across the country could take 500 million to $1 billion in and deploy it over the next 2 to 3 years, right? So you have to make sure you're a fit, but the bottom line is it never hurts to talk, and it never hurts to have your name in the mix for all of those. It's really just about how every company only has so many. You could be the smallest company or the largest company, and you only have so many resources for all, like so much time and energy. So you just have to spend your time and energy smart with regard to the government.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
I think
our
that's
number one recommendation.
I think that's great. I think the other thing that you know, so much of this of the emphasis of the bipartisan infrastructure law is focused on sort of place-based programs, specifically on, as Steve mentioned, energy communities, on disadvantaged communities, on Justice 40 initiatives. So what are ways that folks could be looking for who either, you know, are in those communities already or are looking to relocate to communities like that? What are ways that you envision them being able to interact and participate in those kinds of programs? For instance, one of the things that I've seen is a real interest in revitalizing some of those incubators and innovation hubs, again, using hub.
I know, so many hub terms,
a lot of hubs,
right?
yeah.
Like we're gonna have a different definition of hub by program. No, we won't,
That's
but it's a great question. So so much of, and I feel like I've been saying this for 2 years, we have knowns and unknowns, right? And then as an administration advances, more moves to the known bucket from the unknown bucket, but we just start with a bunch of ideas and a bunch of things that we know will happen, but we don't know how, when, where, what, right?
Yep.
And so
Yep.
thankfully we're now a year in, so we have a lot more known in the known bucket, like that. People like me don't sound like crazy people as much, because we've known things are going to get moved with the department. We've known they need a demonstration, but now it's public, right? So I sound crazy before it moves to the public bucket. But the bottom line on the EJ, and I think I've had this conversation. This is my 3rd time having this conversation today, no joke. The EJ, the question mark associated with EJ by grant is still very much TBD by grant program. So like, for instance, last week in charging, we got a map that says what's going to be EJ communities for the DOT programs for charging. We don't have that for anything else yet, right? And a lot of that is still to be determined. So to answer the question about what like RISE members can do, and what we've even been telling our larger clients is to talk to your members, actually, because the members and the senators, like you saw,
Sorry, you're
Manchin,
saying members of Congress. Yeah.
members of Congress, yeah, and your senators, because like even you see Manchin kick off his hub strategy this week. Murkowski was talking about last week. Schumer had a huge announcement last night. And if you have a large presence that you think really serves an underserved portion of the community, the members are actually the good central points in a lot of that while we figure it out. You're going to have to also look at what DOE puts out. And like one of my very good friends from DOE said to me a few weeks back, like, they're just going to have to engage at each step.
Yeah.
Companies have to engage, and everybody just has to do it. So you can't, that doesn't mean you can't engage. That's just the recommendation. You don't need to engage. It's just the recommendation for today. But that's where what we're telling some companies too, that are larger entities, is like, talk to the senators about who on the ground they think is going to be our best DJ partner. And some of that's been HBCUs in some cases, it's been tribes in other cases, it's been technology institutes, it's been national labs. So we're circling around a bunch, but we're still waiting on. There's landholders, like a lot of landholders actually, but we're still waiting on more direction.
I think that is just a helpful reminder that engaging with one entity is always necessary, but never sufficient. And so, it's critically important that folks actually respond. Like the Hydrogen Hub RFI has a section like of 10 questions specifically dedicated to how is your hub application going to address these priorities around justice and equity and investment in disadvantaged communities. And I think one thing that people should understand is like there's 60 questions in those RFIs. You don't need to answer them all. So you should, if you have a specific perspective that would provide value to the Department of Energy in how they would implement the program, you should write that and tell them about it. And ignore everything else. I think that's a really important point, that sometimes people get overwhelmed by the scale of an RFI, but in reality, this is just an opportunity for you to deliver your perspective to the people who are shaping those programs. And at the same time, I think your advice is extremely important, that engaging with your member is always valuable and provides you a huge opportunity. They are specifically there and have staff that are specifically dedicated to help you engage with the government, with the federal government, with the administration on the priorities that and
sometimes they can't, right? And some things they can't, but we're seeing a lot of engagement, especially given the dollar amount of going through the Department of Energy, and quite frankly, the importance to their constituents. So it's a really good time. I probably would have said that a year ago, considering everything. I definitely would have said it too, but like, it's just a really important, people think engagement goes into the crafting of the law, but there's also going to be a lot of engagement on the deployment. Because like I said, the reason why there wasn't engagement in ARA is it was 1 to 2 year money. This is 5 to 10 year money.
That's a great point. And I'll just say to RISE members, if you have questions on how to engage with your members of Congress, that's something that we'd be happy to talk through with you. So we are here to provide those kinds of assistance and resources. Obviously, Tate has an entire practice built around engaging in those kinds of conversations, and we obviously encourage you to talk to her as well. But the entire idea is, how do we make this more accessible and easier to do for small and non-traditional businesses that haven't had the kind of opportunity to build entire federal business development practices? I can't let you go without talking about innovative procurement and acquisition methods. Obviously, you've heard the pitch that we have, that we believe there's a existing capability and opportunity for the Department of Energy to deploy these funds and really stand up this portfolio of technologies that they're investing in, using innovative acquisition methods that are specifically built to do this kind of interaction with the private sector and collaboration with the private sector. So what's your thought on, whether that's other transactions authority or sort of other ways that we could see more direct collaboration between government and the private sector in this case, and see demonstrations and prototyping through those kinds of things. What's your thought on how we get the Department of Energy to sort of invest in those methods?
Yeah, and this is one of the hardest questions out there right now, right? So again, but we got to get there. We got to get there. So before I jump into that, the two last things I want to say on the RFIs. Number one, you are entirely correct. Put whatever you want in those. Like this is, and I'll just give a quick example.
Great.
What we did over the past 2 years on, and of course, this isn't exactly analogous, but even like recs we're getting in are in the RFI responses or in the RFI requests. They will listen, especially if a number of people are saying the same thing. And so, for example, like on the last year and getting the battery money in the bill, we just kept on writing RFI responses on behalf of like 10 to 20 clients. Like, we need a material supply chain. You need to spend $10 billion. And like, after you write it enough, they will listen. So try to group with others who will write the same thing. Write RFI responses. They do have an impact. Write recommendations. They do, and send them in response to meetings. There are impacts. Not everybody is going to have the impact that we want, right? But the bottom line is like, you can't complain about things not going your way if you don't weigh in. So, and you can weigh in any way. Now, when it gets to solicitations, you can't. You have to check each box. But RFIs, blank slate, make sure you weigh in. Last thing on DOE before we leave it too, don't just focus on the bill. Make sure you're looking at the RFIs coming out of the R&D programs. There are a lot more RFIs than ever, especially that are applicable, especially for small businesses, and a lot more tools for small businesses coming out of ERE. So go on the ERE website too, and then make sure you're signing up for RFIs that come out of, like, if you're batteries, you should sign up for vehicle technologies. We'll just have to say that.
Yep.
Okay. Now on the innovative financing, where do I even begin? We're making progress. Like, we have an OTA project starting again. After that's been really hard. We have ESCO projects with vehicle integration. We're looking at UPs with EV integration, battery storage. I mean, this is a tough area, but what's happening right now. And the short answer, because we're still in the unknowns phase, this is a little more of a short answer. But the short answer right now, and I say that I've said this a lot, is that now is the time to focus on the DoD market. If you look at what happened in Obama Energy, and a lot of us who've known each other for a decade now know this, they really couldn't get it. The Pentagon really can't get up to speed and ready until all the politicals are in that are Senate confirmed. So it really starts at 18 months, at 12 to 18 months after an administration starts. And the bulk of it really occurs in that next 2 years. Right. So we are just at the point where the administration is ready to engage on these topics and ready to act on these topics. So we haven't gotten that far with this administration. We've gotten much further with other third-party finance, like Loan Program Office, because that was ready to go when the administration came in. But two things are impacting this now. Two things are what make this ready to go. Number one is the politicals are in. Number two is the uncertainty of BBB. The money that IIJA is providing is only a drop in the bucket of what's going to need to occur. So I've already been getting calls from politicals saying, oh crap, how do we integrate more third-party financing? Third-party financing is the desires in the EOs, but it's hard. So it's much harder. They're hard in different ways, but the bottom line is now is the time. It's not time to give up. It's time to weigh in a little bit more. and keep those projects moving forward, but the projects won't move forward if industry doesn't move them forward. They'll get too caught up along the way.
Yeah, I think that's, I think two things that you said really resonate with me. Number one is, well, we cannot, you can't overstate how big an investment the bipartisan infrastructure law is. And as you described, it was always meant to be accompanied by the climate and clean energy provisions of Build Back Better, or whatever those new form those take. So they are meant to be complementary investments in our clean energy and climate future. So as you are engaging with members, I would encourage you to also emphasize the importance of that complementarity. And then,
well, but it's
second,
also an opportunity. Well, we have BBB
exactly.
uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's actually a huge opportunity to push third-party finance projects forward that can be replicable for the next 5 to 20 years, right? Like, we're not moving away from this. We have a huge issue to solve. And if once we start to crack the nut on all this acronym soup of contracting vehicles that I won't go back through, like, that's going to be where the opportunity is for businesses that will extend far beyond this administration. If you want to look back at the ESPC market, look back at housing through enhanced use leases, like, that's where the opportunity is going to be. We just have to crack it. We're still
That's right.
that.
No, and that's exactly what I was going to say is, and this can't wait for that, right? This can't wait for the perfect solution of Build Back Better. And if the government tries to deploy these funds and achieve these goals through the regular course of business, they will not be able to achieve it. And so I think that's a huge opportunity, as you mentioned, for companies and for and political leaders to take some risk and really work even through these sort of tried and true methods like OT. The Department of Defense moved many billions of dollars through other transactions authority last year and over the last decade. And so these are proven methods applied to a new purpose. And I think it's incredibly important that we see that kind of action from the government in the near term.
Yeah, and energy is tough, but we'll get there.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
And that's why you need sophisticated teams to work with on it, but we will get there. The federal government has to, quite frankly. So,
Exactly.
but it's going to be a lot harder without people without dedicated industry dedicated to the effort as well.
So okay, so we'll wrap up here, Tate. This has been tremendously helpful. I think what I'd like to do, though, is just, what is one thing that you are looking for in the next 3 to 6 months that you think is going to be really impactful? It can be something that's released by the government. It can be a particular confirmation, a particular appointee that you think is going to be transformational. It can be a restructuring like we just saw at DOE. What is the one thing that you think, what's next?
So I haven't been asked this question. This is and I get asked a lot of questions, but okay, actually, think of it this way. So the government always takes, once something's started up, it takes 12 to 24 months to get to fruition, right? And what I made a comment before that the only thing, and personally with my phenomenal team, we worked really hard on this. And it goes back to 2008 history too. And the loan program was ready to go, even with tweaks when Obama came in. Jigar Shah is at the helm of the loan program everywhere. He's been everywhere from pretty much day 30, 60. The bottom line is, like, the next 3 to 6 months, you're going to start to see a lot from the loan program, in a good, sustainable way. And so then you're going to start to see the OCD solicitations, and then we're going to start to see military projects. So my point is just, you're going to see announcements on LPO, and that's what I'm really excited about, to get those projects over the finish line. We're working on about a third of that pipeline, and it's really exciting. but then that doesn't mean that you can stop on the rest of the stuff. So, or you should get distracted. Just think of it as like, this is what you're going to see announcements on next, while we wait for implementation and we wait for, or while the other projects are starting to move through and develop. So I know that's not your exact answer, but I think
that's perfect. I think the idea that, listen, a first mover and the first real public interaction and deployment of funds is going to be the Loan Programs Office. I think that's a very important point that in particular this audience will be receptive to. So Tate, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your thoughts. This has been a tremendously helpful conversation, I think, to all RISE members. And we'll wrap up here. I do want to, again, share, just share some of the upcoming events again that we mentioned earlier today. So, next week we'll be in Newport. We would love you to stop by. Keep in mind that we have these upcoming webinars where you're going to hear really from a lot of the DoD leaders, whereas this was more focused on DOE leadership and DOE implementation of clean energy. And then again, if you're not a RISE member today and you want to be, it's really easy to join. Please head to rise-consortium.org and join today. If you have any questions or anything like that, you can email rise@ati.org. Thanks to Tate, thanks to Steve, thanks to Haley and Tracy and Adair from our team who put these events together. And we will talk to you soon.